Christmas Eve, CEO Astrid Collins' calendar is packed to the minute until her Bentley dies outside a tiny, grease-smudged garage. A tall mechanic, Carter Flynn, wipes his hands while his bright-eyed daughter, Louisa, cups a thermos labeled for Dad. Astrid demands speed. The shop offers cocoa and patience, when Louisa quietly tightens a loose relay and asks, "Who's waiting for you, ma'am?" Astrid flinches. The car isn't the only thing stalled tonight. A promise, an empty penthouse, and a childhood grief need repairing after all. Seattle wore its Christmas Eve snow like a soft, unforgiving blanket. From the 45th floor of Collins Meridian Systems, the city below glittered with holiday lights strung across lampposts and storefronts, each one a small defiance against the storm rolling in from Puget Sound. Inside the glass-walled conference room, however, the atmosphere was colder than anything the weather could conjure. Astrid Collins stood at the head of the table, her reflection sharp in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Blonde hair pulled into a tight knot. Dark suit that cost more than most people spent on rent. A red silk scarf at her throat, the only concession to the season, and even that felt like armor rather than celebration. Her calendar lived on 3 screens simultaneously. Laptop, tablet, phone. Every slot filled, every minute accounted for, every silence occupied. 48 hours until the board vote on the $1.1 billion merger. 48 hours until Collins Meridian either became a household name or a cautionary tale in business school case studies. The European Investment Fund wanted reassurance. The London attorneys wanted signatures. Silas Mercer, her chief operating officer, wanted her visible at tonight's investor gala, shaking hands and projecting confidence while wearing something sparkly enough to photograph well. Helen Prescott, her office manager, slid a folder across the table. The Volunteer Initiative. HR spent 3 months organizing it. We promised the team a holiday volunteer day. Her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with the paperwork. Astrid didn't look up from her phone. Push it to Q1, after the vote. You promised them before Thanksgiving. I promise a lot of things. Astrid's finger swiped through 14 unread messages from the deal team. Right now, I promise to close the biggest acquisition this company has ever seen. Helen's pause lasted 3 seconds long enough to communicate disappointment without uttering a word. She gathered her materials and stood. Your mother used to say that keeping Christmas promises mattered most. The name hung in the air like smoke. Astrid's hand stilled on her phone. For one heartbeat, she was 10 years old again, watching paramedics wheel a gurney through their front door on Christmas morning, the tree lights still blinking their oblivious colors. Then the memory dissolved, drowned by the buzz of another incoming call. Silas Mercer didn't wait for her to pick up. He simply walked into the conference room, William Whitaker 2 steps behind him. Both men carried the particular confidence of executives who believe their own press releases. Wardrobe confirmed for tonight, Silas said, setting down his tablet like it contained state secrets. We need you on that stage by 8:15. The Geneva fund managers fly out at midnight. This is our window. William, ever the numbers man, tapped his screen. The restructuring plan is ready to deploy December 27th. After the holiday, before the news cycle picks up. Clean, quiet, efficient. His tone suggested he was discussing a software update rather than 300 jobs. Restructuring. Helen's voice cut through the corporate euphemism like a blade through butter. You mean layoffs? I mean optimizing human capital allocation. William didn't even glance at her. The market rewards efficiency. Astrid watched them both, her face a practiced mask of neutral calculation. Somewhere beneath the glass and steel and numbers, a small voice whispered that her mother would have hated this version of her. She silenced it with the same discipline she used to silence everything else. Amanda Rivers, the head of public relations, appeared in the doorway. Her expression tight with the particular anxiety that comes from trying to control a story already slipping through your fingers. We might have a leak. One of the HR coordinators mentioned restructuring in a chat channel. I'm seeing some journalist inquiries. The room temperature seemed to drop another 5 degrees. Silas leaned forward. Then we accelerate the optics strategy. Astrid at the gala. Astrid with the investors. Astrid showing everyone that Collins Meridian is strong, stable, and ready for expansion. Astrid closed her laptop with a soft click. "Archie, has the car ready?" Waiting downstairs, Helen confirmed, her voice carefully empty. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Astrid watched the floor numbers descend, each one a small countdown to the evening's performance. Smile. Handshake. Champagne glass held, but never emptied. The role she'd perfected over 14 years of clawing her way from junior analyst to corner office. The snow had thickened by the time she stepped into the building's underground garage. Archie Doyle, her driver of 7 years, stood beside the Bentley, brushing fresh powder from the windshield. "Roads are getting nasty, Miss Collins," he said, opening the rear door. "Might want to leave extra time." She slid into the leather interior, already pulling up her speech notes on her tablet. The car glided up the ramp and into the swirling white curtain of the storm. Headlights carved tunnels through the snow. The city's usual evening rush had thinned to a trickle of cautious vehicles creeping between lanes. They made it 7 blocks before everything changed. A delivery truck, sliding on black ice, locked its brakes and fishtailed into their lane. Archie's hands moved with professional calm, steering the Bentley toward the curb, away from the collision. The truck corrected and rumbled past, leaving them unscathed but for one critical detail. The violent swerve had sent the car through a pothole concealed beneath snow, and the impact jarred something loose in the engine compartment. Dashboard lights flickered. Once. Twice. The smooth purr of the engine stuttered, coughed, and died. Archie tried the ignition. Nothing. Tried again. The starter clicked weakly, like a tired heartbeat giving up. "Electrical," he muttered. More to himself than to Astrid. Something shorted. They'd coasted to a stop on a narrow side street, the kind Seattle kept tucked between its glossier avenues. Old brick warehouses converted into artist studios. A corner grocery with hand-painted signs. And there, half hidden beneath strings of yellow bulbs and a snow-dusted tarp, a wooden sign that read, "Flynn and Son Auto." The building was small, crouched, almost apologetic about taking up space. But its windows glowed warm, and through the frosted glass, Astrid could see the silhouette of someone moving beneath a lifted hood. Archie stepped out into the snow, his breath fogging the air. Astrid followed, her heels immediately sinking into the slush. The cold bit through her scarf and found her skin within seconds. The garage door stood half open. Inside, the smell of motor oil mixed with something unexpected. Gingerbread. A portable heater hummed in the corner. A radio played a crackling rendition of Silent Night. And there, bent over the engine of an old pickup truck, was a man in coveralls, his hands moving with the careful precision of a surgeon. Carter Flynn straightened when he heard their footsteps. He was tall, with the kind of build that came from lifting transmissions rather than gym weights. His face carried the lines of someone who smiled often but had learned to temper joy with realism. Oil stained his knuckles. Grease marked his forearms. His eyes, however, were clear and steady as they took in the stranded Bentley, the overdressed executive, and the situation that required no explanation. "Car trouble?" His voice was deep, patient, like he had all the time in the world, and no intention of rushing through any of it. Astrid's jaw tightened. "The engine died. I need it running in the next 20 minutes. Carter walked to the Bentley, his boots crunching through snow. He leaned down, listening to Archie's description of the symptoms. Then he popped the hood and shone a flashlight into the engine bay, his movements methodical and unhurried. Behind him, a small figure emerged from the back office. A girl, maybe 9 years old, with dark curls escaping from a knit cap and eyes that held the particular brightness of children who grow up, watching their parents work with their hands. She carried a thermos-white enamel, slightly dented, with "For Dad" written in permanent marker across the side. In her other hand, a small box of gingerbread cookies, homemade by the look of them. "Louisa," Carter said without looking up, "grab me the voltage tester from the red toolbox." The girl set down her thermos and moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything lived in this small kingdom of tools and parts. She returned with the tester, then stood on her toes to peer into the engine compartment alongside her father. Astrid checked her phone. 8 messages from Silas. 4 from the event coordinator. 1 from Helen that simply read, "Be safe." So? Astrid's voice carried the sharp edge of someone used to getting answers immediately. What's the damage? Carter touched the voltage tester to several points, watching the readout. Relay's loose. Looks like it vibrated free, probably from that pothole. But there's also moisture in your fuse box housing, and I'm seeing some corrosion on your mass wire connection. The loose relay is why it died. The moisture and corrosion are why it won't restart. Then tighten the relay, and I'll be on my way. Carter straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago given up any pretense of cleanliness. I could do that, and you'd make it maybe 3 miles before the damp fuse box housing cracks from the cold, shorts out your electrical system, and leaves you stranded on the freeway in a blizzard. He said it without judgment, just stating mechanical fact the way someone might mention that water flows downhill. I have somewhere I need to be. I understand that. Carter's tone didn't change. But I don't hand over keys to a vehicle that might fail. Safety before speed. That's how we work here. Astrid's fingers tightened around her phone. In her world, problems came with price tags, and solutions came with signatures. Throw enough money at an obstacle, and it moved. But this man, standing in his small garage with oil under his fingernails, was offering her something money couldn't purchase. A principle he refused to compromise. How long to fix it properly? 2 hours. Maybe 3. I need to dry the housing. Seal it. Check all your grounds. And replace that corroded mass wire. Carter glanced at the storm outside. Honestly, you're lucky you stopped here. And not on the interstate. Silas's name lit up her phone screen. Astrid declined the call. Louisa, who had been watching this exchange with the quiet attention of children who learn by observing, stepped forward and held out the thermos. Would you like some cocoa? It's still hot. The offer was so simple, so earnest, that Astrid felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. She looked at the thermos, at the girl's expectant face, at the warm garage that smelled like oil and gingerbread, and something her memory labeled as before everything changed. I don't drink cocoa, she said, the words coming out harder than she intended. Louisa's face didn't fall. She simply nodded, as if this was useful information rather than rejection, and returned to her spot near the workbench. Carter caught his daughter's eye and something passed between them, some wordless language of support and understanding. I'll need to use your internet to work while you fix the car, Astrid said, already looking for a place to set up her laptop. Service is spotty, Carter replied, returning his attention to the Bentley. Storm's messing with the cell towers. But you're welcome to try. He was right. Her phone kept cycling between 1 bar and no signal. Her laptop couldn't maintain a connection long enough to load a single email. The carefully constructed digital scaffolding of her life flickered and failed, leaving her stranded in a way that had nothing to do with the car. Astrid stood in the center of the garage, suddenly aware that she had no map for this particular kind of stuck. No protocol for waiting. No workflow for patience. She watched Carter work, his hands steady and sure, explaining each step to Louisa as he went. The girl handed him tools before he asked, anticipated his needs with the fluidity of long practice. Why do we check the grounds first, Lou? Carter asked, probing a connection with the voltage tester. Because electricity always wants to go home, Louisa recited, clearly repeating a lesson learned many times before. If the path home is broken, everything else stops working. That's right. Carter smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely kind to genuinely warm, just like people. The words landed somewhere in Astrid's chest, unwelcome and impossible to ignore. When was the last time she'd thought about going home as anything other than a stopping point between meetings? Her penthouse was all glass and leather and sharp edges, beautiful in the way a museum display is beautiful. Untouched. Unlived in. Safe. Carter moved to a wooden workbench scarred with decades of use. Beside a parts catalog and a coffee mug full of wrenches sat something that didn't belong in a garage. A large glass jar, the kind used for canning preserves. Inside, dozens of small slips of paper, each one folded and pressed against its neighbors. Louisa noticed Astrid looking at it. That's our promise jar, she explained. her voice carrying pride. "Dad and I write promises to each other. Little ones, like making pancakes on Saturday, or fixing Mrs. Munro's porch light, or picking up the birdseed because the juncos get hungry in winter." Astrid found herself stepping closer, drawn by curiosity she couldn't quite name. Through the glass, she could see fragments of handwriting. "Teach Lou to change spark plugs. Read 2 chapters before bed. Call Grandma on Sunday." "The thing about promises," Carter said, carefully drying the fuse box housing with compressed air, "is that they don't have to be big to matter. Sometimes the small ones, the ones you keep, build something bigger than any grand gesture ever could." Louisa unfolded one slip from the jar. "This one's from Dad, from last month. Take Lou to see the Christmas boats. We went down to the marina and watched them all lit up. It was cold, but Dad brought the thermos, and we shared cocoa and counted lights until our noses were frozen." She said it like it was treasure, like it was wealth. Astrid thought about her own calendar. Every slot filled with obligations that would vanish if she did. Meetings that would happen without her. Deals that would close or collapse based on market forces she couldn't control. Not one entry that would be missed because it had been promised to someone who mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Silas. "Where are you?" investors asking. "This looks terrible." Another from William. "Need you here now." Another from Amanda. "Journalist confirmed. Story brewing. Need damage control." The garage suddenly felt very small and very large at the same time. Outside, snow piled higher against the windows. The storm had intensified, the wind howling around the building's corners like something alive and hungry. Carter worked steadily, explaining to Louisa why moisture was the enemy of electrical systems, how corrosion formed, what safety margins meant. The girl absorbed it all with solemn attention, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood more than most adults would. "Can I try?" Louisa asked, when Carter began working on the loose relay. He guided her small hands to the socket, showing her how to feel for the correct alignment, how much pressure to apply. Astrid watched the girl's tongue poke out in concentration as she carefully pressed the relay back into place until it clicked home. "There," Carter said quietly. "That's what secure feels like. Remember that pressure. That's how you know it won't shake loose again." Louisa beamed. Then she turned to Astrid with those bright, observant eyes. "Who's waiting for you, ma'am? At the place you need to be?" The question should have been simple, should have had an easy answer. Instead, it struck Astrid like a physical blow. Who was waiting? A ballroom full of investors who would forget her name the moment their returns dipped. A board of directors who measured her value in quarterly earnings. A COO who would take her job if she stumbled. A staff about to be decimated by restructuring plans she'd tacitly approved by not fighting hard enough against them. No one was waiting. Not really. Not in the way this child meant. "Business associates," Astrid heard herself say. The words tasted like ash. Louisa nodded thoughtfully, then returned to helping her father. But the question remained, hanging in the air between them like a challenge Astrid couldn't answer. The power flickered. Once. Twice. Then the lights went out completely, plunging the garage into darkness, broken only by the glow of the space heater and the distant shimmer of Christmas lights from across the street. "Power lines down," Carter said calmly. "Happens in these storms. Lou, can you get the camping lantern from the supply closet?" The girl moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone navigating familiar territory. She returned with a battery-powered lantern that cast long shadows across the walls. Carter lit 2 more, transforming the garage into something that looked almost cozy, almost intentional. "I have a backup generator," he said, "but I keep it for the walk-in freezer where we store parts. This'll do for light." Astrid's phone buzzed again, draining its battery, fighting for a signal that no longer existed. She watched the percentage drop. 70, 3, 70, 2, 70, 1. The physical manifestation of her connection to the outside world slowly dying. "How do you check the mass wire in the dark?" she asked, surprised by her own curiosity. Carter looked up, clearly not expecting the question. "Carefully," he said. "But also, you learn to work by feel. Engines have a language. You listen with your hands. He gestured to the fuse box. Want to feel what I'm talking about? Astrid hesitated. Her suit probably cost what this man made in a week. Her manicure was 3 days old. She had a gala to attend, investors to charm, a billion-dollar deal to close. But the alternative was standing in the dark, watching her phone die, counting the minutes until her absence became a crisis. She stepped forward. Show me. Carter guided her hand to the fuse box housing, showing her the hairline crack she couldn't see but could feel a tiny imperfection that would have catastrophic results if left unaddressed. Then he moved her fingers to the mass wire connection, letting her feel the difference between corroded and clean contact. This is what people miss, he said. They see a car running and assume everything's fine, but underneath, small failures accumulate. A loose connection here, a crack there. Eventually, it doesn't matter how fast you're going or how important your destination is. The machine stops. Astrid understood, with sudden clarity, that he wasn't just talking about cars. Louisa appeared at her elbow, holding something out in the dim light, a blank slip of paper from the promise jar. You could write one, she suggested. A promise. For someone waiting for you. Even if they don't know, they're waiting yet. Astrid took the paper. It felt impossibly light in her palm, too insubstantial to carry any weight. But in the warm glow of the camping lanterns, with snow building against the windows and the smell of gingerbread mixing with motor oil, it felt like the heaviest thing she'd held in years. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket, without writing anything. Not yet. Not until she knew what promise she could actually keep. Carter returned to work, and Astrid found herself watching his hands. They moved with economy and grace, wasting no motion, each gesture purposeful. He explained what he was doing to Louisa, turning the repair into a lesson, the lesson into time together. The girl asked questions. He answered them seriously, treating her curiosity as valuable rather than burdensome. When had Astrid last been taught something by another person's hands? When had she last moved slowly enough to feel the difference between right and almost right? When had she last made a promise small enough to keep? The engine finally turned over, smooth and strong. Carter let it run for several minutes, checking readings, listening for irregularities, making sure the repair would hold. You're good to go, he said. Take it easy on the roads. The fix will hold, but the storm won't help anyone. Astrid pulled out her wallet. How much? Carter wiped his hands, considering. 40 for the relay work. 20 for the wire. Call it 60 even. She handed him $200 bills. Keep it. He looked at the money. Then at her, his expression unreadable. The work was $60. I'm not going to charge you more, just because you can pay it. It's a tip. For the fast service. Didn't do it fast, Carter said mildly. Did it safe. There's a difference. He handed back $140. 60. That's the fair price. No one had refused her money in longer than Astrid could remember. She stood there, bills in hand, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or the strange lightness that comes from encountering someone who can't be bought because they've already decided what they're worth. The power flickered back on, harsh fluorescent lights banishing the warm shadows of the lanterns. The spell broke. Astrid's phone immediately lit up with a cascade of notifications, each one more urgent than the last. She should leave. She should go straight to the gala. She should do damage control and charm investors, and pretend the last 2 hours hadn't happened. But as she reached for the door handle, something stopped her. A memory, surfacing like a bubble from deep water. Her mother. Christmas Eve. 24 years ago. Astrid had been 10 years old, excited about presents and decorations, and all the glittering promise of childhood. Her mother had sat her down, taken both her hands, and said, "Being present, really present, is the greatest gift you can give. Remember that, when life gets busy. Remember to be where you are." 3 hours later, her mother had collapsed. Aneurysm. The doctors said it was quick, painless, a genetic time bomb no one could have predicted. Astrid had spent every Christmas since then making sure she was too busy to remember, too scheduled to feel, too important to stop. She looked at Carter and Louisa, standing in their small garage with their jar of promises and their thermos of cocoa. She looked at her phone, at the 17 missed calls and 32 unread messages. She looked at the Bentley, running smooth and steady, ready to take her back to the life she'd built out of glass and steel and carefully maintained distance. Then she did something she hadn't done in 14 years. She turned the car around. The garage lights were still on when Astrid pulled back into the lot. Carter looked up from his workbench, surprise clear on his face. Louisa, bundled in her coat and preparing to leave, stopped mid-step. Astrid rolled down her window. "Is there something else you need fixed tonight? Before you close?" Carter's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. He glanced at Louisa, then back at Astrid. "Well," he said slowly. "Mrs. Monroe called earlier. Her car won't start. She's supposed to get to midnight mass at the church on Denny, and her daughter's counting on her to be there. Mrs. Monroe lives 3 blocks from here," Louisa added. "She brings us cookies every Sunday. She's 82, and she never misses mass on Christmas Eve." Astrid felt her phone buzzing in her pocket, felt the weight of expectations and obligations, and the empire she'd built out of being indispensable, felt, for the first time in years, the possibility of choosing differently. "Show me how to fix it," she said. This time, Carter's smile reached his eyes. "Lou, grab the jump box and the socket set. We've got one more house call tonight." They walked 3 blocks through snow that came halfway up Louisa's boots. The girl chattered about Mrs. Monroe's cat, about the time the old woman had let her help bake snickerdoodles, about how important it was that some promises got kept. Astrid found herself carrying the toolbox, her expensive heels completely ruined, her suit jacket soaked through, and she didn't care. Mrs. Monroe's house was small, tidy, and warm with the kind of accumulated comfort that comes from 50 years of living in one place. The old woman answered the door with relief written across her face. "Carter." "Oh, thank goodness. I thought I'd have to miss." She stopped, noticing Astrid. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had other customers." "She's not a customer," Louisa said brightly. "She's helping us." And somehow, impossibly, it was true. Astrid found herself holding the flashlight, while Carter diagnosed the problem: dead battery, corroded terminals. Nothing complicated, but enough to strand someone without help. She watched him show Louisa how to clean the corrosion with baking soda and water, how to test the connections, how to coax an old engine back to life with patience and knowledge. "Can I try?" Astrid heard herself ask. Carter handed her the wire brush, gentle but firm. "You want to remove the corrosion without damaging the terminal." Her hands shook slightly as she worked, unused to this kind of precise physical task. But Carter's patient instructions and Louisa's encouraging presence guided her through it. Clean the terminals, check the connections, attach the jump box, wait for the charge, try the ignition. The engine turned over with a healthy roar. Mrs. Monroe clapped her hands together. Louisa cheered, and Astrid felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, the simple satisfaction of fixing something with her own hands, of solving a problem that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. "I'll make it on time after all," Mrs. Monroe said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, all of you." They walked back to the garage through the storm. Astrid's phone long since stopped buzzing, its battery finally dead. The snow had transformed Seattle into something almost magical, muffling sound and softening edges. Louisa held Carter's hand on one side, and after a moment's hesitation, reached for Astrid's on the other. Back at the garage, Carter started shutting down for the night. Louisa retrieved her thermos and gingerbread, then paused by the workbench. "Are you going to your important meeting now?" she asked Astrid. Astrid checked her watch. 9:47. The gala would be nearly over. Silas would be furious. The investors would be placated by someone else, or they wouldn't. The deal would close, or it wouldn't. The earth would keep spinning, regardless of whether she was there to push it. "I have a different meeting," she said. "An important one." She pulled out her laptop, its battery still holding a charge. The garage's Wi-Fi had stabilized, with the power restored. She opened the video conferencing platform and dialed into the number Helen had given her for emergency board access. The screen filled with faces. Silas, red with anger. William, cold with calculation. Oliver Benton, the board chair, looking resigned to another crisis. Helen, in the corner of the frame, watching with careful attention. "Where have you been?" Silas didn't bother with preamble. "Do you have any idea what kind of damage control we've had to?" "I need 15 minutes, Astrid interrupted. Her voice was calm, certain, completely unlike the frantic executive they'd been calling all evening. "Then you can all decide whether I keep my job." The screen went silent with surprise. Astrid adjusted the laptop's angle, aware that they could see the garage behind her, the tools, the posters of engine diagrams, the strings of Christmas lights Louisa had hung last week. She could present from anywhere. She could make her case from exactly where she stood. "I spent tonight with a mechanic named Carter Flynn and his daughter Louisa," she began. "My car broke down outside their garage. I could have demanded a quick fix and risked breaking down on the freeway. Instead, they insisted on doing it right, taking time, ensuring safety over speed." She saw Silas about to interrupt, and held up a hand. "Let me finish. While I was waiting, I learned something about preventive maintenance versus catastrophic failure." Carter explained that small problems, left unaddressed, accumulate until the whole system breaks down. A loose connection here, corrosion there. Eventually, it doesn't matter how fast you're moving, you stop. She pulled up the file Helen had sent weeks ago, the one about the volunteer initiative. But she didn't present that. Instead, she shared a different screen, a spreadsheet she'd been building for the last 30 minutes while sitting in Mrs. Monroe's driveway, her hands still smelling of battery acid and winter. "We're about to cut 300 jobs to improve quarterly earnings," she said. "That's catastrophic maintenance. We're waiting until people break, then eliminating them. Here's what preventive maintenance looks like." She walked them through the numbers. Fleet maintenance costs, reacting to breakdowns versus preventing them. Employee retention costs, training new hires versus supporting existing ones. Brand reputation, the price of being known for layoffs versus being known for stability. The volunteer program, reframed not as charity, but as community investment that generates long-term trust. Carter Flynn runs a small garage. He employs 2 people full-time, trains apprentices from the community college, and has a waiting list of loyal customers. He makes a modest profit, but he'll never have a catastrophic failure because he doesn't cut corners. He doesn't sacrifice safety for speed. He fixes what's broken before it breaks everything else. William leaned forward. "That's a charming story. But we're not a garage. We're $1 billion. We're a system made of people," Astrid said. "And we're showing signs of corrosion. Look at the data. Employee satisfaction down 12% over 2 years. Voluntary turnover up 19%. Emergency fixes, rush hiring, overtime costs, quality control failures up 31%. We're not optimizing. We're deteriorating." She shared another screen, the proposal she'd sketched out, modeled on something she'd seen tonight in a jar on a workbench. Community garage partnership. We partner with local repair shops like Flynn and Son. Our fleet gets preventive maintenance at fair prices. They get stable contracts and funding for apprenticeship programs. We reduce our catastrophic breakdown costs by 40%, conservatively. They increase their capacity and training pipeline. The community sees us investing in local business. Everyone wins. That's not the business model we presented to the investors, Silas said tightly. Then we present them with better data. Astrid's voice carried steel now. We show them that prevention is cheaper than catastrophe. That loyalty, real loyalty, earned through fair treatment, has measurable value. That sustainability isn't just environmental, it's operational. Oliver Benton, who'd been silent through the presentation, finally spoke. "You're proposing we cancel the restructuring?" "I'm proposing we restructure our thinking," Astrid replied. "We implement this partnership program as a 90-day pilot. We track metrics. Fleet downtime, maintenance cost per unit, employee satisfaction, brand favorability. If after 90 days, the numbers don't support it, We kill the program. We have a clear, measurable kill switch. But if the numbers work, and I believe they will, we scale it. Helen, on the corner of the screen, was smiling. William looked skeptical but thoughtful. Oliver's expression had shifted from resignation to interest. Silas simply looked furious. "This is insane," Silas said. "We can't make a billion-dollar decision based on one night with some small-town mechanic." "We're not," Astrid said quietly. "We're making it based on data, operational logic, and the understanding that sustainable systems require maintenance, not just exploitation. Carter Flynn doesn't charge more than fair price. He doesn't cut corners. He keeps his promises. And his business has survived 22 years, 3 recessions, and countless competitors who tried to do things cheaper and faster." She paused, looking at each face on the screen. "I've spent 14 years building a company by moving faster, pushing harder, and filling every minute with productivity. Tonight I learned that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is stop, assess the damage, and fix what's actually broken." The silence that followed felt different, weighted with consideration rather than shock. "I'll need to see detailed projections," William said finally. "Full cost-benefit analysis. Risk assessment for the partnership program." "Helen has been developing those for 3 months," Astrid replied. "She's been trying to get me to look at them." Helen's smile widened. She shared her screen, and suddenly the call was filled with graphs, charts, case studies from similar programs at other companies. She'd been ready. She'd been prepared for the moment when someone finally listened. The vote, when it came, was closer than Astrid expected. Oliver in favor. Helen enthusiastically supportive. William conditional approval, pending the 90-day data. Silas opposed, but overruled. The restructuring postponed. The community partnership program approved for pilot implementation. When the call ended, Astrid sat in the quiet garage, listening to the sound of Carter closing up the shop. Louisa appeared at her elbow, the promise jar in her hands. "Did you write yours yet?" the girl asked. Astrid pulled the blank slip of paper from her pocket, found a pen on the workbench, thought about what promise she could actually keep, what small thing might build into something larger. She wrote, "Be present with someone who needs it." She folded the slip and placed it in the jar, alongside all the other small promises that built a life worth living. Carter walked over, wiping his hands on the rag he always seemed to carry. "Everything work out?" "I think so. Differently than I planned, but better." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "The Bentley should run smooth now. But if you have any problems, you know where to find us." Astrid stood, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. How completely this night had upended everything she thought she knew about urgency and importance, and the difference between being busy and being present. "Thank you," she said, "for not taking shortcuts." Carter's smile was warm. "That's not something you thank someone for. That's just doing the work right." She drove back through the snow, the Bentley running smoothly, her phone still dead, her suit ruined, her carefully constructed schedule in shambles. And for the first time in 14 years, she felt like she was heading in the right direction. 1 year later, the sign at Flynn & Son Auto had been repainted. It now read, "Flynn and Daughter Auto. Louisa, 10 years old and already able to diagnose most common electrical problems by sound alone, stood beside her father as they opened the shop on a bright winter morning." The community garage partnership had exceeded all projections. 12 repair shops across Seattle now participated. Fleet maintenance costs had dropped 38%. Employee satisfaction was up. The story had become a case study at business schools. Not for the numbers alone, but for the recognition that sustainable systems require investment, not extraction. Astrid still worked long hours, still closed deals and managed crises and made difficult decisions. But her calendar now included gaps, spaces marked simply as present. Sometimes she used them to visit the garage, to learn new skills from Carter's patient teaching. Sometimes she used them to have coffee with Helen, to thank the woman who'd been trying to show her a better path all along. Sometimes she simply sat in her penthouse and remembered the night she learned that being stuck wasn't always a catastrophe. Sometimes, it was an opportunity to repair what you'd been too busy to notice was breaking. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the Bentley broke down, Astrid arrived at Flynn and Daughter Auto with a box. Inside were a dozen thermoses, each one engraved with a different name: Carter, Louisa, Helen, Archie, Mrs. Monroe, and 7 others people who'd taught her something about keeping small promises. "For your promise jar tradition," she said. "Everyone should have something that reminds them to keep what they've promised." Louisa opened hers, read the engraving, "Be present," and looked up with shining eyes. "Are you going to write another promise?" Astrid pulled a slip of paper from her pocket, already written. She'd been carrying it for a week, waiting for the right moment to add it to the jar. It read, "Teach someone else what Carter and Louisa taught me." She placed it in the jar, watching it settle among hundreds of others. Small promises, kept faithfully, building a life that measured success not in quarterly earnings but in the accumulation of presence, in the difference between speed and safety, in the understanding that sometimes the most important repair you can make is the one you do for someone else, without expectation of return. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. Inside the garage, the thermos warmed their hands, the promise jar caught the light, and 3 people who'd been strangers a year ago shared cocoa and gingerbread while planning the next expansion of a partnership program that proved sustainability could be profitable, prevention could be cheaper than catastrophe, and sometimes the best thing a CEO could do was learn to fix things with her own hands. The lesson, as Carter had said that first night, was simple. There are fixes you can see, and fixes you have to feel. Astrid had spent a career optimizing what she could see. Now she understood that the most important work happened in the spaces between the kept promises, the patient repairs, and the small acts of presence that, accumulated over time, built something strong enough to weather any storm. The Bentley, parked outside, gleamed in the holiday lights, running smooth, maintained with care, ready for whatever roads lay ahead. Just like everything else worth keeping.